Opposition to the Muslim Brotherhood and the President of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, has returned to the country. Protesters, numbered among the millions, took to the streets across Egypt, with opposition groups giving the president a deadline to resign and call early elections. The Muslim Brotherhood offices in Cairo were also burned and looted.
But with the government condemning the protesters and looking unlikely to accede to their demands, how is this civil disobedience likely to continue? Both sides claim to be heirs of the revolution, but who are the protesters? What is driving their calls for Morsi's resignation? And what is the direction they wish to steer the country? We are discussing these and other issues with our guest speakers, Mona Makram Abeid, political sciences professor, a former member of Egypt's parliament, and a founding member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, to name a few.
Mustafa Kamal al-Sayed, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Center for Developing Country Studies at Cairo University.
Mahmoud Jarabah, of the Friedrich Alexander University in Nuremberg.
Professor Khaled Fahmy, of the American University in Cairo.
And Silvia Colombo, of the Foreign Affairs Institute in Rome. Early Monday morning, Tamarod campaign, and Tamarod is translated like rebellion, issued its first statement of the revolution demanding President Mohamed Morsi step down by Tuesday at 5 p.m. Now, this is really a blunt statement, and the question is whether Mr. Morsi is going to comply, and if he does comply, where it takes the country. If I get it right, Ian, I suppose you found different figures to illustrate the scope of the protest. 14 to 17 million?
Yes, it was between 14 and 17 million according to the Interior Ministry of Egypt. And this was not just in Cairo, this was across the whole country.
Absolutely.
But nevertheless, this is something around about 15-20% of the population.
Well, which definitely makes it an absolutely unprecedented protest in the history of this country. And now I suggest we could listen to our guest speaker, Professor Khaled Fahmy of the American University in Cairo.
Not even the organizers in their wildest dreams expected this huge turnout. So, and the main thing is not only the size of it, it's the scale of it. This is not only limited to one or two places in Cairo. It's not limited only to Cairo. It's also not limited to the north of the city, which is the more prosperous part of the country. It also spreads in the traditional backwater of the Muslim Brotherhood, the south. So every single large city in the south had witnessed large demonstrations yesterday against the president and against the Muslim Brotherhood. And more are planned for tomorrow, Tuesday. So this is the first time that something on that scale was delivered. These demonstrations are much, much bigger than what we witnessed in January and February of 2011, the demonstrations that ousted Mubarak. I marched in them. I was in Tahrir from day one of the revolution. I was in Tahrir also yesterday. What I saw yesterday is much, much, much larger and cuts across many segments of the society. Right now we are in the middle of a deep crisis, so it is difficult to imagine how this can evolve. I think the fears that we had yesterday of violent clashes did not materialize, so this is very good news. I also don't think that the army will interfere, which is the second worst scenario that we were afraid of. The general, the chief of the army, basically said that he's standing neutral, he's not going to take action. I think the key thing to look out for is what happens within the Muslim Brotherhood itself. Yesterday was a very clear signal to the Muslim Brotherhood that something very wrong is taking place in the way they manage and rule and govern the country. So if the Muslim Brotherhood receives this message and looks and has a serious introspective look to revise its policy and to say we need to be more inclusive, we need to reach out to the opposition, we cannot continue with the winner-takes-all attitude, then maybe we can start seeing a different policy. Now, this requires a serious reshuffling of the cards within the Muslim Brotherhood. With that existing extremist position that has been dominating the Brotherhood since for many years, not only in the past few months, being ousted. I don't think the question, in other words, is whether President Morsi will resign or not. President Morsi is only a puppet. He is not the main person in the Muslim Brotherhood. He's being manipulated by a group of extremist politicians and maverick politicians within the Brotherhood. The question is whether the rank and file, the youth of the Brotherhood, will take action in the organization and say enough is enough, we risk losing everything if we stay this course. I think this is the key question to look out for, what happens within the Muslim Brotherhood.
But is this scenario possible without more violence?
That is the only way that more violence could be stopped. In other words, a serious gesture on the part of the government, on the part of the presidency, on the part of the ruling faction, that yes, we have received the message loud and clear, we are going to take action to change our course. That's the only way that violence could be stopped. Realistically, it's very difficult to think. These are unprecedented times. This is not a normal crisis in a democratic system. These are unprecedented times. So we have to think in original ways, in new ways. You're telling me this is not realistic. I'm telling you what happened yesterday is not realistic. Who would have expected millions, 17 million people to march in every single large city in the country? This is unprecedented on a human scale, not only in Egypt. Something unprecedented and, in a sense, also unrealistic needs to be done.
Well, Professor, thank you ever so much. And just to remind you, our guest speaker was Professor Khalid Fahmy of the American University in Cairo. And now for the European perspective, we are joined by our next guest speaker, Silvia Colombo of the Foreign Affairs Institute in Rome.
I think that this huge protest which took place in Tahrir yesterday and which is probably going to continue for the next days is not a realistic way to exit the current situation of polarization which we see in Egypt. To some extent, this protest is really the result of long months of deterioration in the relationship between the citizens and the leadership. Of course, the leadership represents a particular component of Egyptian society, and the polarization which we have seen growing in the past few months is really now coming to the surface. It's really becoming, the first and the most important element of differentiation and political conflict in Egypt. I think that the only way really to get over this particularly delicate moment for Egypt's transition and future is for both parties to take a step back and on the part of the protests, of course, to realize that this move is not going to make the Egyptian system more democratic, because we have a democratic act, a protest, confronting another democratic act, which is the fair and election of a president 1 year ago. On the part of the regime and the president and the party which supports the president, of course, there is the need to change completely, not just the output, the policies themselves, because this could be difficult, but the way of working, the way of engaging with the different strands of the Egyptian society and the political parties which have emerged after the ousting of Mubarak. Of course, some pressure from outside is therefore needed, and I think that so far the European Union has tried, for example, to put this pressure on the Egyptian leadership. On the part of the US, instead, I see that there has been much more reticence in addressing this huge question of the polarization of Egypt and the sustainability of such a system. So a change also in this is badly needed.
Thank you so much. And just to remind you, our guest speaker this time was Silvia Colombo of the Foreign Affairs Institute in Rome.
Burning Point. We're looking at the escalating protests against Mohamed Morsi in Egypt.
However, though I believe that Ms. Colombo maintains that there is no real alternative for Mr. Morsi as the president of the country, the mere fact that the opposition has put forward a claim urging Mr. Morsi to step down might suggest that they still have a personality in mind. And this is something we've been discussing with our next guest speaker, Mustafa Kamal Al-Said, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Center for Developing Countries Studies at Cairo University.
I do not think that there is an agreement on who would be the candidate of the opposition. The major figure in the opposition is Mr. Hamdin Sabahi, who himself was a presidential candidate in 2012, and he came out first, getting something like 5 million votes. I think of all the opposition figures, he is the one who is likely to emerge as a candidate with a good prospect of winning the election. But I don't think there is an agreement on Hamdin Sabahi to be the single candidate that would represent the opposition.
And what is Mr. Sabahi's background?
He is a Nasserite. As a student, he led a Nasserite organization in Egyptian universities, and he founded a party called Al-Karama, the Dignity Party, and he is committed to the ideals of late President Gamal Abdel Nasser, which were ideals calling for an active role of the government in pushing the economy. You could say that he is committed to some sort of socialism, and he is a supporter of the Palestinian rights, and he is in favor of more independent foreign policy of Egypt, particularly vis-a-vis the United States of America.
Professor, and getting back to Mr. Morsi, do you think that perhaps giving him a short notice is really the best solution to the problem?
President Morsi has not been capable of establishing credible dialogue with the opposition figures. I think he abides more by the wishes of the guidance bureau of the Muslim Brotherhood, and this is the difficulty. He did not deviate from a sort of roadmap that the Muslim Brotherhood set for themselves in order to have complete control of the institutions of the government. And for this reason, no one expects him really, if he enters into a dialogue, that he would be open to make any concessions. He never made any concession since he came to the presidency. Moreover, also his government has been extremely incompetent, and his handling of domestic and foreign affairs has been also leaves much to be desired. Under these circumstances, we have two options. Either we continue to face, these difficulties under a sort of incompetent administration under President Morsi for 3 more years, or, we run the risk of going through presidential elections and choosing someone who does not belong to the same trend as Dr. Morsi, who would be open to cooperate with large variety of people who can appoint a more competent administration. I think Egypt does not lack the human potential to make a great leap into development. But confining the government to a small group of people who are acting there on the basis of an outdated ideology and who do not have really the experience and the knowledge to run the affairs of the government, I think under these circumstances, Egyptians would prefer to run the risk rather than remaining under an administration which is definitely failing in meeting any of the challenges it faces.
Professor, thank you so much. And just to remind you, our guest speaker was Mustafa Kamal Al-Said, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Center for Developing Country Studies at Cairo University. Yet it seems that another player is stepping forward in Egypt, and this is something we've been talking about with our next guest speaker, Mahmoud Jaraba, of the Friedrich Alexander University in Nuremberg.
For me, as I'm following the news from Egypt and particularly what the Muslim Brotherhood is saying, Morsi is not going to leave even after 2 days or maybe for 3 years, because the plan is to stay another 7 years, not even 3 years. The question right now is what is the solution? I think the solution is in the hand of Morsi and the military right now. If we look for the most powerful movement or organization in Egypt, we can talk actually about 3 parts. We talk about Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists. We can put them in one category. We can put the military as the most powerful organization in Egypt, and we can talk about the third part, which is represented by the old regime. These three groups, they are the most powerful groups right now in Egypt. I think that the solution must come from the first two parts. The Morsi government, because he's represented the Egyptian people right now, and he's in the role of president, and the military. If they can represent a solution or take some decision in order to calm down the street, I think there will be a solution.
But if in that case, do I get you right that perhaps the best scenario would be for Morsi and for the military to introduce some kind of a military dictatorship?
The problem that we have right now in Egypt is that the opposition, they do not trust the Muslim Brotherhood and Morsi government. This is the main problem. We need a third party who can at least guarantee any agreement between the Muslim Brotherhood and the opposition. The only one who can do this agreement is the military. And this is the question right now. If the military and the Muslim Brotherhood can come to an agreement or can come to an initiative that can bring all of the Egyptian people toward a new map maybe for this to continue and to complete the transition period, in this way I can see a solution. But if the Morsi continued without putting on the table a new initiative, a new plan, I think the situation will continue unstable in Egypt. And here we need to see a rule for the military, but not to hold the power. Because I think also this is a dangerous issue, and if the military come to power again, maybe he will not leave it for decades.
Do the military trust Morsi?
As you know, like Egypt military is a secret organization, and we don't know exactly what is happening inside the military. It's like a black box. We don't know exactly the development within the military and how they think about this crisis in Egypt. But what we can say right now, from the development in the last few days, and what the military statement which appeared in the last few days, that the military can be a major player in the next phase. It means that the military can guarantee any agreement between the opposition and the Muslim Brotherhood, and also it can supervise this agreement. Therefore, if they come to an agreement and you have some powerful organization like the military who can implement this initiative, here we can find a solution. But if not, and if the chaos continued in the street and we have more clashes between the Islamists and the Muslim Brotherhood on the one hand and between the opposition on the other hand, and we have more people get killed, here I think the military will intervene in somehow in the process.
Well, Mr. Jaraba, thank you so much. And just to remind you, this time our guest speaker was Mahmoud Jaraba of the Friedrich Alexander University in Nuremberg. And now with more details of the role of the military in the current standoff, here is our next guest speaker, Mona Makram Ebeid, political sciences professor and a founding member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs.
No, first of all, the country has never been as polarized and divided as it is nowadays, never in its whole history. And as you see, the president has presided during a year over a dismal catalogue of failures. So, until yesterday, we did not know what the protests would look like. But after the amazing turnout of 30 million Egyptians, the president has no choices. His choices are limited. And the people have said their word. He should resign or call for new presidential elections. That's what the people are asking for. Yesterday morning, very early, I was asked to join a group of highly eminent people here in Egypt in a minister's house with the former head of the security and others, a famous writer and the head of the labor organization, or the peasants organization rather. And we were about 7 or 8 people. And the discussion turned around that it's finished, time is over, we should turn to the army. So we drafted a letter yesterday to the army asking them to fulfill their promises, because they said from the beginning they will not allow the country to slide down. They promised to stand by the people. They will not allow the people to be vilified or attacked. They will not allow the spilling of blood. But they also said that they will support legitimacy. However, as we can see, we have already seen yesterday that there are many injured, a handful of dead and scores of injured. And we decided that really it is time for, and the armed forces had given a week. They said during this week the different forces of the country should get together to thrash out, a reconciliation or a consensus on some issues so as to avoid more bloodshed. Both sides were adamant. They did not meet, so nothing was done. And yesterday was almost a tug of war. Mm-hmm. So we decided that we cannot stay put and watch. By the way, I myself have resigned 2 days ago from being a senator to side in support of the protesters. And in protest that the last presidential speech did not offer any flexibility or any inclusiveness or any gesture, to mitigate this rising anger.
But Professor, suppose the president leaves his position. What could be the reaction of Muslim Brotherhood in that case?
It will probably be very violent, and that's why we're asking the armed forces to restore order. If they restore order, there'll probably be martial law for some time. We are asking them to set up a presidential council, to choose a coalition government, but be very attentive to what I'm saying now. We're not asking for the army to rule us. We are just asking for them, and in any case they are very reluctant. It is us who are asking them, so it is out of popular demand if they do respond. And it's not a military coup, as the Americans will think, or as any foreigner will think. It is not. It is in response to the call of the people who are asking them to save lives, to restore order, and to preserve the spirit of this country, which is a 7,000-year-old country. It doesn't want to sink into going back to the Middle Ages. Probably the reaction will be very violent, but as I tell you, it's only the army that can put a stop to any further violence. The army is the strongest army in the region. The army is loved by its people. The army, I was myself advisor to the SCAF, which is the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, for 8 months until they were removed. And every family in Egypt has a member in the army. And that's why there is this symbiosis, if you want to call it. And we are not the only ones who are calling for the army. They're being called on by several sectors of the society.
Professor, thank you so much. And just to remind you, this time our guest speaker was Professor Mona Makram Ebeid, a former member of Egypt's parliament and a founding member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. And with this, we end this edition of Burning Point, brought to you by